I've spent 7 months traveling around Bali, and now I want to share everything that I've learned with you so that you can enjoy your trip to the fullest, whether you're going for a week or several months. You'll need to get into Indonesia, and the entry requirements can, change all the time, so make sure to check up on this before you book your trip. At the time of recording this, you no longer need to be vaccinated against a certain virus, so now it's probably more about looking at what visa you can get. A lot of countries are eligible for a visa on arrival, which allows you entry for up to 30 days. And this visa is also extendable by another 30 days while you are in the country. But make sure to check if your country is eligible for the visa on arrival. You can either get the visa online before you go, or you can just get it in the airport when you arrive. I recommend getting it online before you go, and then you can probably skip a queue in the airport. Bali basically has a rainy season and a dry season. So if you want a bit more certainty for nice weather, dry season is April through October, and November through March is the rainy season. In general, rainy season sees fewer tourists, but as you can probably guess, the weather can be a bit more hit or miss. But just because you go in dry season doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to have sunny days all the time. I remember a time in June I was in Ubud and we had 10 days of straight hardcore rain, and another time in January where for 2 weeks straight there was nothing but blue skies. It can really go both ways whether you're visiting in rainy season or dry season, of course with a higher chance of more blue skies during the dry season. But I don't think you should let that scare you away if you're only able to go during the rainy season. And if you are too worried about the weather during your trip, just try not to be. Often it will rain for an hour or two and then you'll get blue skies after. And don't trust too much on the weather forecasts, as they will likely say rain all day, every day, which is probably also true as it is likely raining somewhere in Bali. So I think you can pretty much go to Bali anytime during the year and have a great time, but perhaps try to avoid the bigger holidays as it can get super crowded on the island. My first point here is to try to avoid the most popular areas. But let's pull up a map real quick. Here we got Kuta, Seminyak, and Canggu. Most tourists will stay in these areas, but also end up pretty much staying here the whole time. Don't do that. But why would I say to try to avoid these areas? Well, first off, the traffic is horrible. Even when just going a short distance, you can get stuck in traffic for an hour easily. Everything here is a bit more expensive, as well, that's just supply and demand, I guess. The more people who are here will drive the prices up. And lastly, in my opinion, you just don't get that real Bali feeling here. Most people you see will be other tourists, and many hotels and restaurants are owned by foreigners. And in my opinion, you can have a much better experience outside of these popular locations. But obviously they're popular for a reason. I mean, here there are so many beautiful villas and hotels and just fantastic restaurants everywhere. There are parties going on pretty much all the time, and if you're into shopping, you will also be very happy here. Everything is very easy and accessible and very westernized, so it can be really comfortable staying in these areas. But if you're coming for a vacation, perhaps start here and then move on. But where to? Let's look at some other great places you could explore in Bali. Ubud is another very popular place to stay actually. You get a lot of that yoga, zen vibe with beautiful rice terraces nearby and of course the monkey forest. But it is also really touristy, but definitely worth checking out. And I personally had a great experience staying more on the outskirts of Ubud as it was then less busy. Next is Uluwatu, or the other areas down south. This is where the amazing white sand, beautiful beaches are in Bali. It also has very much a surfer vibe, as you'll be catching some great waves down here. It's perhaps also more of an up-and-coming place, so it is getting pretty popular already. So there is a lot of construction going on and already a lot of beautiful and nice hotels and restaurants. But it's usually less busy than the other places I've mentioned, and I really enjoyed my time beach hunting and hiking in Uluwatu. Then there is Nusa Dua, and here I had one of the weirdest experiences in my time in Bali. I kind of drove through this area on accident as I was going to a specific beach, and this area just feels like a Disneyland in Bali. It's like completely closed off. Everything is so nice and tidy. I had to drive through like a checkpoint to get into the area, and then there were just huge avenues that were almost empty. So basically this is where all the huge luxury resorts are located, and it's just a completely different version of Bali that you will see here. If you're traveling with kids or you just love these famous luxury resorts, then you could probably think about going here, as it is one of the only areas with like really calm water on the beaches. So in the beginning I mentioned Kuta, Seminyak and Canggu. If you are going to be staying in one of these areas, I would probably recommend Canggu, but perhaps look a little bit north to the Pererenan area, as it is usually a bit more chill and less crowded. Okay, so that was pretty much the more touristy areas where you would probably find that most tourists will be going. So let's have a look at some of the lesser visited places in Bali that I really recommend that you check out. So the first is Sidemen, and here you will find beautiful nature, rice fields everywhere, just a calm vibe with a lot of small local villages. In Sidemen you can really escape the crowds and soak in that Balinese atmosphere. There are also some amazing hotels around here, although not that many. You can really find some fantastic stays here too. Next is Amed, which is in East Bali, and it is easily one of my favorite areas on the island. Somehow the weather here is just always great, and it's also touristy enough that you have a decent variety of places to eat, also more Western food if you're looking for that, and there's also a pretty good selection of hotels, although the standard probably won't be as high in the places that we discussed before. But you'll also find that the prices are a lot more affordable. A lot of the tourism here is due to the diving scene. It's a great place to go diving and snorkeling, and there are a few shipwrecks close by, and I loved going freediving here. I can really recommend checking out the USS Liberty wreck. Moving on, we got Munduk. In the mountains towards the north, you can have a completely different experience. Up here, the weather gets a bit chillier and it rains more, but you will be rewarded with spectacular views and a new waterfall around every corner. But we can also go beyond Bali. Indonesia consists of over 17,000 islands, so obviously Bali is just a small speck of this fantastic country. But let's have a look at some nearby islands that are quick and easy to get to and very much worth combining with your visit to Bali. Just next to Bali sits 3 smaller islands: Nusa Lembongan, Nusa Ceningan and Nusa Penida. Now personally I never made it to the first 2, but they should have great beaches and more of a very laid back, chill beach vibe. You have probably seen Nusa Penida before. This iconic place, Kelingking Beach, is located here. However, what most people do is to take a day trip to Nusa Penida from Bali. So you sail from Bali, you get picked up in a car and get driven around to all the different touristy spots. The problem with this is that this is exactly what most people do. So you can imagine how the traffic gets on the small jungle roads when a bunch of 4x4s are trying to race the same way. So if you can, staying a night or 2 on Nusa Penida will be well worth it. And you can then get to enjoy the stunning locations without the crowds. One morning I went out to Kelingking Beach for sunrise, and I was the only person there. Now I also can't avoid talking about the Gili Islands. This might be the real paradise here. I ended up going back to these islands 3 times. I just couldn't stay away. So the Gili Islands are 3 small islands off the coast of Lombok, which in itself also could be worth visiting. The beaches are incredible, the water is crystal clear and motorized vehicles are not allowed, so you walk or ride a bicycle to get around. It's just that perfect laid-back beach island vibe. It's also incredible for diving and snorkeling. You can literally walk off the beach and go swim with sea turtles. Gili Trawangan is the bigger and more developed island with the most people, most things going on, and more partying. Gili Meno, on the other hand, is the smallest and has probably the least going on, so it also has a very laid-back vibe. And then you have Gili Air, which sits somewhere in between the two. I would recommend spending at least 2 to 3 nights here so you can enjoy it, and as you also do spend a bit of time on the transportation getting to and from the islands. A pro tip is to take the boat from Amed to the Gili Islands, as you can then cut down that transportation time quite a lot, and you could then combine it with a great stay in Amed. Now, how long should you stay in Bali? Probably as long as possible. Even though the island is not huge, there's just so much to do and to see. So you will have to prioritize and figure out what you like, what you would want to see, and which areas you would prefer to stay in. If you're flying in from, say, Europe or America, I probably wouldn't stay less than 10 days. 2 to 3 weeks would be a great amount of time to stay here, if you can, of course. Now, there's no public transportation on the island, so you basically have 2 options: getting someone to drive you around or to drive yourself. Let's talk about both options. Getting a taxi in Bali is pretty easy. There are regular taxis, and then you can use apps like Grab and Gojek, which function a lot like Uber. It's also pretty cheap to get these rides, and if you want, you can hire a driver for the whole day for a pretty reasonable price. But the traffic can be really bad, especially if you are staying in the more popular places, as I mentioned. And if you are in a car, you can really expect to spend a long time just sitting around in traffic. If you do rely on taxis, you're also a bit more limited in getting around, as a lot of places are not super, sidewalk friendly. In the more touristy areas, you definitely can, but it is a bit more limiting. Now, you can also hire a taxi scooter via these apps, and doing this, you can avoid at least some of the worst of the traffic. And they're also super quick to arrive, and the prices are usually pretty low. Then, of course, you can drive yourself and you can rent a car. But if you want to do this, you really got to have balls of steel, and I really don't recommend it. So if you can, want to, and feel comfortable doing it, renting and driving a scooter is the best way to experience Bali. You just get an amazing freedom that you wouldn't otherwise have. But knowing how to drive a scooter is very important, as quite a lot of scooter accidents do happen in Bali, in particular involving tourists. The traffic can seem really chaotic, and it probably is. But there is also some kind of order in this chaos, and just somehow a lot of unwritten rules that you have to follow when driving around. The Balinese are very good drivers, and most are very patient and respectful drivers, which is quite rare to see. But if you're not up for renting your own scooter, it's not like you're gonna have a worse experience in Bali. You probably just need to be prepared to spend more time in traffic, in particular around the popular places. Bali really has some incredible hotels and villas, but you can also stay in cheaper places and really make your budget last. Here you'll primarily be looking at homestays, often run by locals, and it will most often have a basic room with a toilet, perhaps a small terrace, and some shared spaces. And even though the prices can vary greatly, I will just share a few, average prices, so you just get an idea of what you could expect to spend. So homestays can cost around 10 to 15 US dollars per night. Mid-range hotels could range around 50 to 100 USD per night. With fancier hotels, you will probably be looking at $100+. And for villas, you can easily look at $300 or more per night. But as I mentioned, the prices can really vary, and especially the area in which you're staying will have an effect on the price. The list of fantastic places to stay in Bali is almost endless. Just hop on any booking site and search away. However, feel free to let me know if you would like a video with some specific hotel and villa recommendations. As you can probably sense by now, you can really do Bali on a budget. Go very fancy and stay in expensive places, or pretty much anywhere in between. Accommodation and food will be your big posts here. And if you stay in just homestays, you could easily spend just a couple of $100 for a 2-week stay in Bali. Whereas if you wanted to stay 2 weeks in a fancy villa, you could easily be looking at paying thousands of dollars. So it really depends on your personal budget and what you want to experience. So when my girlfriend and I travel around Bali, we mostly stayed in homestays, but we would then sprinkle in a few nights in a more fancy hotel or villa here and there to be able to get that experience as well. And for us, that was a nice way to do it and to travel and experience Bali without blowing our budget completely. And once again, location really comes into play here. One of our favorite villas we stayed in is called Sangklung Villas, and it's this huge luxury villa, and it costs only around $75 per night. And that's mostly because of the location. It's pretty isolated up in the north, and it's not really close to anything. Whereas a similar villa in a more popular place like Canggu or Seminyak would easily cost 5 to 10 times more. And if you want to save money on food, there is just one tip: eat local. And that leads us nicely into talking about food. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many fantastic restaurants in Bali, and it seems like new ones are popping up each week. I will say though, if you eat mainly in Western style restaurants, you can probably expect to spend around $10 for a meal and a drink. But if you go for local restaurants, warungs, you can expect to spend maybe around $1 to $3. And personally, I love Indonesian food and really ate it most days. And although perhaps you could say they're a bit boring, my favorites were nasi goreng and mie goreng. So basically fried rice and fried noodles. Using the same apps that you can use for transportation, Grab and Gojek, you can easily order takeaway as well. And I probably did this more than I'd care to admit. Also just want to share a couple of things that I think you should avoid doing in Bali. So the first is taking these very tourist trips. Of course, this really depends on how you like to travel and what you're able to do. But these very, set tourist trips where you get picked up in a car or even a minibus, get driven around to some temples, waterfalls, in my opinion, it's just really not a great way to experience Bali. A lot of people take the exact same trips, so when you arrive at the waterfall, it's just incredibly crowded and you will be spending a lot of time in the car in traffic. Now, if you do want to go on a day trip and see several amazing places, talk to the driver about doing perhaps a custom itinerary so that you can avoid the worst traffic and crowds, and better yet, leave as early in the morning as possible. The next thing I recommend you not do is to stay in just one place. So if you do arrive and go to Canggu, stay a couple of days and then move on to the next place. There is just so much more to Bali than just Canggu. And the final point here is just to behave. There's been so many stories lately about tourists showing up and doing weird and bad stuff. Just don't be that person. Be nice and respectful and, well, I guess just a good person. Let's talk about money. In more medium to, high-end hotels and restaurants, you can usually pay with your credit card. But a lot of places do only accept cash, so you will likely need to use an ATM. Just be aware that there can be a small fee on your withdrawal and that the amount you can withdraw can vary, and it's usually not that high. I recommend withdrawing some money when you arrive in the airport and using one of the major banks' ATMs, as you will have no nasty surprises there. I'll put up the names here on a few that I recommend. And here's a pro: don't do like Adam tip. So the ATMs in Bali dispenses cash first and then your card, which is the exact opposite of what I'm used to. So after a long flight and not sleeping for 24 hours, of course I lost my card my first night in Bali. So be aware of that, and well, you should be bringing more than one card anyways. Alright, so that was a lot of practical stuff about your visit to Bali. Now, if you want to know some specific locations like great waterfalls and amazing beaches, you can watch this video right here where I share 30 of my favorite locations all around Bali. Thanks a lot for watching and have a great trip to Bali.